I wasn't surprised by the backlash that Metroid Prime 4 Beyond has received, but what's interesting about it is how quickly it's fallen by the wayside. How pretty much all the copes in regards to this game have completely fallen apart. How pretty much universally everyone who's played this game likes it. The only people who are upset are people who genuinely thought Metroid Prime was some like I don't know, first person shooter, multiplayer Halo style game. Like that's the issue at its core is that Metroid Prime is not and never has been a generic space marine adventure. Okay. It is not an FPS. It is a first person adventure game and really distinguishes itself from the rest of the genre. It's better than Half-Life, it's better than BioShock, it's better than Mirror's Edge. And what we're seeing from the community is just this kind of inability to process that. This inability to process that this is a hardcore game for a hardcore audience and that, you know, this isn't something for the casual PlayStation and Xbox audience. And this interests me a lot because this is the exact same thing we saw with the original Metroid Prime trilogy. You're probably too young to remember this, but when Metroid Prime on GameCube was originally announced, it was an extremely polarizing game. Everyone thought it was going to suck. Everyone came out and started screaming about how bad it was going to be and how Metroid was ruined and how Nintendo didn't know what to do with their biggest franchise. And then, Metroid Prime was a huge hit, and then going forward, people did the same thing for Metroid Prime 2 and 3. I knew so many people, so many people who hated Metroid Prime 2 and 3. And looking back on it, on one hand, it does make a whole lot of sense that, especially with Metroid Prime 2, that this game was kind of polarizing and people didn't like it as much. But on the other hand, it's still way better than everything else you were playing. It's way better than say Metal Gear Solid 3 or Devil May Cry 3 or so many of these other like PS2 era games. Like Metroid Prime 2 in a lot of ways is just genuinely a masterpiece. And the more I play it, the more I kind of realize that, a lot of people's in frustrations with this game come from the inability to adapt to what it's trying to accomplish and what it's trying to do. And I get the same sense from Metroid Prime 4 as well. Over time, I think Prime 4 is going to be a very, very popular, well received game. And like Metroid Dread and Samus Returns before it, it's going to garner a fan base over time. But what's interesting about Prime 4 is seeing just how many people don't remember how controversial Metroid Prime 2 and 3 were when they first came out. I was being screamed at growing up about how like Metroid Prime 2 and 3 were huge disappointments and a huge disrespect to the franchise and how Nintendo didn't know what they were doing and it was a huge step down and Halo 2 and 3 were way better and it was just a giant cope from people who didn't have the first clue as to what they were talking about. That is the reoccurring aspect we've been seeing from the Metroid Prime games, or rather the Metroid fan base in general, because they have this mindset that Metroid is something that it's not, that it's this super mainstream AAA product that will appeal to like a mass market, that this is something that can like sell as much as Halo or that their competitors or that this is the same as like any other AAA game. And what we're seeing now with Metroid Prime is that like you're seeing people being frustrated that it's not that Metroid has its own unique design, it has its own unique tone, it has its own unique gameplay aspect, and what you're experiencing is people just being are completely incapable of dealing with that. We saw this when Dread came out too, right? When that came out and the initial reaction was that like Hollow Knight was way better and that this was just a carbon copy and that Nintendo didn't know what they were doing and that Mercury's theme sucked. And in actuality, like Dread was one of the best Metroidvanias ever made because it improved on the combat mechanics. It had really good pacing. It had all this gorgeous artwork. It was just really, really fun to play. Like it just had way more going on than Hollow Knight outside of just simply memorizing enemy patterns. Like Metroid Dread was a really good example as to like how Metroid is the pinnacle of the genre, how they constantly innovate and they do new things and they improve and they radically experiment, but the nature of that design philosophy means by its nature that it will never ever ever reach mainstream success. Like that's kind of the point of these games, is that they aren't like super mainstream titles. They are games made for dedicated players. You know, they are hardcore Nintendo games. And what we're seeing more and more of is that people don't really understand that and they lash out because like, oh man, this isn't mainstream enough for me. It's too difficult. Like I don't know where to go. Like, you know, you've been seeing a lot of that with every Metroid Prime release. And 4 is really interesting because I think this is the first time where we've seen like genuine pushback to the idea like day one, because with Metroid Prime 2 like it was kind of a slow gradual thing for that game to be seen as a classic. You know, for Prime 3 it was a slow gradual thing. Like it's interesting seeing the release of Prime 4 and seeing these people like who hated Prime 4, who went back and played the real Metroid Prime games 2 and 3. Like it's interesting seeing these people come away from 2 and 3 thinking those games were really really good, because again, those games were wildly hated when they came out. And that is going to be the reoccurring pattern, I think, for these Metroid games, is that the industry will be desperate to downplay and ignore them no matter what. You know, you will continue to see them like complain and seethe about every Nintendo game every Metroid game that comes out. But on the flip side, you are going to constantly have people go back and play games like Metroid Fusion or Super or Samus Returns or Dread or the original Metroid Primes and suddenly start realizing that these games actually are very, 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 very good. And there's just nothing that the industry can do to stop that at this stage. It's one of those IPs that will just constantly keep bringing new people in. And it's going to be harder and harder and harder to keep up this facade that like there's something wrong with them, or that they're not popular, or that there's some huge thing holding them back, because you saw a lot of that like with the release of Silk Song, because the narrative was that like, well, Silk Song is way better than Metroid and Nintendo needs to go after the Silk Song audience, and yet like the reality is Nintendo will be able to put out sequels to Metroid in a reasonable time frame, while Team Cherry won't be able to do jack shit. You know, that's going to be the reoccurring thing I think we notice going forward when it comes to this kind of thing. That is going to be like the major cultural phenomenon. That is going to be like the thing we see, is that um like, and I suppose we've seen this with Castlevania as well, the Symphony of the Night games. Like the industry can hype up whatever trendy thing they want as like the anti Metroid, but the reality is Nintendo's in a position where they can do whatever they want with the IP or nothing with the IP, and it'll still stay very very relevant because of just how prevalent these games are and just how well made they are and just how people are constantly playing them all the time. It is it is going to be amazing over time seeing Prime 4 suddenly get this dedicated following of people who really, really like it and appreciate it for what it is. You know, I noticed this when, you know, the other day, I think it was yesterday, there was this, you know, the haters were finishing Metroid Prime 4 for the first time, and they were trying to like seethe about the ending and making it seem like it was like this really terrible thing. And I just kind of laughed at it because, you know, I, the actual fan, have already declared it to be one of the best endings in Metroid Prime. You know, because yeah, you know, I actually played the game, I actually understood the lore, I actually talked about it, and you know, I thought it was a very powerful, impactful moment. You know, that really sold the Federation troopers as their own unique characters, and it's something that I find very, very interesting. Like how much discourse there is like regarding this title. You know, I see people simultaneously saying this game is too linear and too non-linear, and it, it's very interesting like the completely different experiences people have with this. And the overwhelming consensus realization I'm having is that like everyone who hates this game is just plain wrong. Like you see this all the time as you study it, as you look into it, as you play the game yourself. Like the people who hate this game are doing so out of some warped idea of what Metroid should be instead of appreciating Metroid Prime 4 for what it is. For its like bold new direction, for what it tried to do for the franchise, how it's has a completely different style and tone and the new mechanics and the new features, the more like the story, the characters. Like there's so much about Prime 4 to really, really, really love. And it's very, very, very frustrating to see so many people do everything they can to try and downplay it. It's not going to stand the test of time, just like it didn't stand the test of time for Metroid Prime 2 and 3. But the fact that they try it all is very, very frustrating. And it's something that I think we should push back more against.